Welcome, Sens Talk.
Here comes Smith with a pass across. Oh, he scores! He bats it in! Tim Stutzler wins it for Ottawa. Triple Grant is going to put the finishing touches on an Ottawa win. Oh! See you later. Go Sens, go!
All right, welcome back to Sens Talk. I am joined with the Athletics, Julian McKenzie. Julian, welcome to Ottawa and welcome to Sens Talk, my friend. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, man. Thanks so much for having me on the podcast. This is it's an honor, man. I know a lot of people have reached out the last couple of weeks, so I'm glad I was able to get on your podcast too, man. So this is awesome.
Yeah, it is incredible. I really appreciate your coverage. When Ian Mendez left the Athletic, a lot of people were worried about that void, and certainly you filled that void with some great coverage. And it's great to have you on the show as well. Before we get into the Sens, and we all know we're recording this after a 4-0 loss to the Carolina Hurricanes on Saturday night. We all know the sky's falling for some, and we'll get to that in a second. But, you just came to Ottawa. How are you liking it so far?
I like it. I'm originally from out east. I'm originally from Montreal, so like I've been to Ottawa a bunch of times before, and I've always appreciated the city. But to live in the city, a beautiful city that it is, and the friends I've made here have been really nice. I'm really happy that I'm here. Just my journey through hockey media has been really fun, man. Going from Montreal to Calgary to Ottawa is the third NHL team I've been around. Like, it's a very special run, and like. Look, we're very early in the season. We're not even at the 20 game mark yet. We'll get there soon. But I've liked what I've seen from this team at different points. I get that there's some stuff that's concerning, but overall, like the experience of talking to players and talking to media and being on different shows too, I've really enjoyed it. I think it's a really cool media market. Even if people will see it as like a smaller media market, but I think it's really cool with all the different personalities that are there. And I also I don't think I've really said this, but I think the media side in terms of like podcasts like yours and guys like the Locked On Senators podcast and the different fans that show themselves on Senators Twitter and Senators social media, I kind of dig y'all. I find there's a lot of like harmony and like
Yeah.
you guys kind of prop each
We've been
other
through
up.
it,
Like
man. We've been through it,
yeah, like but I think that's cool. And I mean, and that's not no shade to any other like media market that I've been in, but I feel like you guys prop each other up in terms of the similar podcasts, but even like media guys you would deem professional, quote unquote, who go on your shows, like there's a little bit of there's a little bit of like harmony between those sides too. Like you guys are supportive of what we write and what we create in terms of content. I find there's a little bit of synergy there. At least that's just my impression off of how you guys have been with me, but also how you guys are with like Brent Wallace or when Ian was doing his shows or Claire Hanna as an example. Like I think you guys are a really cool and a really passionate market, and like I really appreciate the fandom. So I just wanted to give you guys your props.
Well, shout out to you. That is, I mean, I'm already your biggest fan, I think, after that little segment there.
I don't know about that.
Let me tell you something though.
We just started the podcast.
I think that comes from the culture of Ottawa, where we're actually a pretty large city, as you know. I mean,
yeah,
you've driven through the city. I mean, the city's not built for the amount of people that are here. That's for sure. I mean, my goodness, the traffic. But you have the big city in actuality, but it feels like a small town. Everyone kind of knows everyone. It's a small circle, whether it's hockey or just in Ottawa in general. And I think that's just kind of the vibe here. My next question, of course, because you kind of mentioned just like the difference of, Montreal obviously is like one of the biggest media markets for hockey. So going from there, and Calgary's not a small market by any means, but I would consider it kind of in the middle to Ottawa.
No, I get it. It's
right?
And it's not shape or saying
what
it. It's considered a smaller market. Yeah. I are you asking about the differences between
like just
all three of them?
Yeah, like just kind of walk us through, as a young professional in the industry, like what is your approach? Because obviously you mentioned here, with bloggers, it's more like open, if you want to call it that. But
yeah,
those closed markets like Montreal, especially, advice for young content creators and journalists for one, but also what are the differences kind of like in the approach and whatnot?
Okay, I think I'll start with the approach stuff first and then advice after. Three different markets, three different approaches at least. Like Montreal, man, like dude, there's so many people who cover the team, and so many people want to be around the team, and so many people want to talk about the team. And also, while there's a little bit of this in Ottawa, you're also getting it in two languages. And also, like, I don't know how it is in Ottawa, but the fact that it is two languages, but like people who are well versed in English in Montreal, they're definitely going to tap in on what everyone says on the French side too, especially if it's something that's going to burn people's ears. And I think that like the passion that's there in that market and the media attention that's there, like I personally feel like if you're able to make it work in that market, you can get plopped into any of the other 32 across the NHL just because of the intensity of the pressure that's there in terms of how you're supposed to cover guys. The one kind of big thing that I didn't really like, but also was a bit different for me as someone who was behind Arpin Basu and Marc-Antoine Gaudin when he was with us at the Athletic. I thought the access to, in particular, the NHL players, it's very different compared to the access I could get to players in Ottawa and definitely in Calgary too,
In what
where
way?
like so like in the Montreal locker room, and maybe I'm going off of older experience and also just getting out of like the pandemic. Like you go in the locker room and yeah, there'll be some guys available, but like I think you have to maybe it's not that easy to get a guy like alone, I find. Like you might have to if you're trying to just talk to a guy, all of a sudden all these other people are just gonna everyone's kind of free. Everyone's it's like a free game. It's like everyone is able to get a player that is out there and available to talk to people. Again, this is off of my experience when I was there like 2, 3 years ago, and maybe it's changed with the pandemic restrictions being loosened and all that. But like, I just find like it's so much tougher if you're trying to get a guy one on one versus like going to Calgary where I know like the first week I was there, I was able to talk to guys like Jonathan Huberdeau and Nazem Kadri like pretty easily.
Yeah,
Whereas in Montreal, like I might have to wait like 3, 4 weeks to talk to. This literally happened to me.
I
I
got you.
remember waiting about a month to be able to talk to Joel Edmondson one on one. Right, that's such a big difference
Yeah.
from that market. And then in Ottawa, like it's definitely in the middle where I think that you're it's pretty easy I think to go in the locker room and try to just talk to some guys but definitely like there's some guys where they might not necessarily be as around so you might not be able to build that relationship as much, but it's also very early in the season, and also I expected that once we get to November, December, January, it's not going to be like what it is in training camp or the early parts of the regular season where the season just started. Everyone's at 0-0-0, and everyone's still kind of you're just happy to get the season going versus being in this middle part of the year where you're in tunnel vision mode, where you're
Yeah.
you're just focused on the season ahead. I just think that the biggest difference, I know I'm kind of rambling, but like
Oh, it's okay.
it's really just the media access. It's just it's very different in all three of them. I don't know in terms of the second half of your question about content creation, like just
Yes,
general
advice.
advice.
Yeah.
I don't know, man. Just do it. It's very basic to say, but like if you like making videos, if you like writing, if you like talking about hockey, if you like talking about particular teams, you have to do it. You can't just be like, yeah, I want to do it. I think it would be something that'd be really cool. And then like you kind of do it. Maybe you do like one episode, you do 2 episodes, you do one TikTok or whatever, you do 2 TikToks, and then you just drop off. You have to actually do it. That's just the biggest thing for me. And also just be yourself. Do
Yes.
it, like do the reps and just be yourself. Don't try to be someone you're not because people are just going to see through that and just not vibe with it. You have to be yourself at the end of the day. If you know you're a diehard Sens fan and you want to make a podcast about the Sens and you want to go all in on this team and you can do it in the way that only you know how to do it, people are eventually going to gravitate to your content and they're going to say, hey, man, you know what? Like, I like your style and I like your vibe. And I'm just going to subscribe to your content because you speak to my feelings as a Sens fan or whatever fan that you're into. So, yeah, be yourself and just repetitions. Just keep doing it.
Yeah, absolutely. I especially agree with the be yourself part of it. I
Mm,
spoke to Alex Adams the other day of Sportsnet, and we were kind of talking
hmm
about the same thing because you're kind of in a similar boat where you're young professionals. You've been in the industry for some time, but you're not like the ones that have been in the league for
I'm
decades.
not Ian.
Yeah, you're not Ian, right? So look, I think being yourself and having your personality is so key because people can see through you right away if you're putting on a facade or an act. So be yourself. But most importantly, it keeps it fun, it keeps it fresh. You know as well as I do. I've been doing this for over a decade.
You've
I'm
been doing
on
this for
year
over a
13.
decade?
Yeah, I started in
Dude, that's
2013.
amazing.
Check out Sense Talk after. You're gonna see videos of me with my little buzz cut, high pitched voice, man. It's
That's
crazy.
amazing.
Grow up. Yeah, man.
Congratulations to
Grow up.
you for being able to do this for about a decade. That's really awesome.
Appreciate it, man. And again, it's about passion, being yourself, and having fun with it. You can't let this fall into the category of like a regular job where you're like, oh, some days I just want to take it off. It's a burden, you know. You don't want that to be the case. There are so many games, there are so many things you have to cover. It's 24/7 type of job. It has to
Mhm.
be fun. So the only thing I would add on to, keep your personality is make sure it's fun. You know, at the end of the day, yes, you want to get views, you want to get the numbers, you want to make sure you're putting food on the table and, making it worth your while, but also have fun during that period of time as well. Don't just make it a job because then you are going to be miserable. And this is the worst job to be miserable at. I'll tell you that right now. This
Oh
is the
man.
worst job because you can't take a night off. It's like an everyday thing, you know? You literally can't. I can tell you that because I haven't taken a night off for 13 years. So I can personally.
Man, I look, dude. Just for that though, I'll tell you this. Like, I don't know if you have that. I hope you do have friends who have nothing to do with what you're about. I have
I do,
friends who
thank
are
goodness.
not hockey people, who are not even sports people, and it's
I sucked at
cool to just be
sports.
in their world and then just like they'll like ask me questions about my job and they're like, "Oh, okay, I had no idea it worked out this way."
Dude,
But
they
like
think
we'll
you're
just
like the
talk about other
expert of
stuff.
sports too. No, if they ever ask you anything about sports, suddenly you're like the expert. You know
Yeah,
everything.
you're the one who knows about insert thing here about sports.
Yeah.
But it's still cool just to kind of turn your brain off and like not have to worry about writing on deadline for something. I think especially when you're young and you're getting into like journalism school or you really are just excited about getting into that world and you need to get your bearings in, get that in from jump because you don't want to be in a position where you're all in and then you're burnt out and then you're trying to figure that out. Like get that in from as your baseline entering the industry. It's going to make you a much more well-rounded person.
And one piece of advice is on top of that as well, the Sens get breaks, so you should get breaks. And most importantly, the Sens need
100%.
life. Life has to come first.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I take a night off just because I'm a human being. And I'm sure
Mm-hmm.
there's sometimes where, if you have an off day, you're like, all right, I'm just going to take a day for myself. These are normal things because at the end of the day, it is still a job. We can have fun with it, but it's still a job and you do need that time and last thing, because I do want to get to the Sens. Uh,
Right.
but and we're talking about consistency. We're consistently being, covering the Sens, and
Yeah.
consistency is the word of the day here in Ottawa. But my point is just keep it fresh, but also make sure you stay fresh, right? Now, speaking of fresh, it's a fresh wound. After last night's loss. I mean, I didn't watch the game. I was out on a date with my girlfriend, but when I went back on Twitter after the game and I saw this goal, or sorry, no goal, I still can't believe it, especially since Connor McDavid literally did the same thing on the same night within the same like hour. So that completely blew my mind. You're gonna see it on your screen here, Julian. I have to ask you.
Okay.
I have my opinions on this. Maybe we agree. Maybe we disagree. That's why you're on the show. We're going to talk about it. What are your thoughts on this goal or no goal? The call here on Tim Stützle that would have tied things up at one halfway through the second period. Could have changed the trajectory of the game. Travis Green was very critical of the call as well. Thought it should have been a goal. What do you think?
Okay. I understand the frustration over people who disagree with the call. By the letter of the law, sure,
Yes.
it's fine. Okay, it's an interference call, but like Tim is not purposely, at least I didn't think so. I didn't think he was purposely trying to knock the stick out. I think just by chance that happened and then he scored. But yeah, by the letter of the law, that happened. Where I think, but like I'm not as passionate about that as I am about people who look back at that game and they just want to put it on the refs.
Okay, I agree with that though. That I agree with.
Because, like, I
You
agree,
got to find a way to win. Doesn't matter what the refs do. That I
because
completely.
the Stützle goal, you're right. That I think that I would have. I think if it just counted, like, I personally would have allowed that goal. If I like, I would probably wouldn't have called that. But I also understand. Okay, if that is to the letter of the law as a rule, okay. The Shane Pinto slash, like, that's not a slash. Like, there are a few weird calls. Where I get concerned over is I didn't think the Ottawa Senators played well enough to win that game. Like the penalties were not good, but
The Cousins in that
where
first period,
where
especially.
where where the penalties? What did the penalty trouble do? What did the refs do on that Anton Forsberg goal that he allowed along the goal line? I didn't see any issue with. There wasn't the refs' fault that it happened that way. Did the refs get in the way of the Ottawa Senators getting a shot in the third period for almost 10 minutes? No, not necessarily. Like there it's a 60-minute game. I think if you're the Ottawa Senators and you need these wins, because considering what the schedule is going to look like for you next week, Edmonton's coming to town, Vegas is coming to town, Vancouver's coming to town. I know Calgary, like maybe they're crashing a little bit, but no, they're not really crashing that hard. They're still a team that's going to play hard and competitive every night as much as they can. They're there in the schedule, and then you go out west to the Western teams. And look, I get it. There's San Jose and LA and Anaheim. They're fluctuating a little bit, and maybe less so in varying degrees for San Jose and Anaheim, but you're on the road. You got to get some wins before this month is over. I thought for them, like this loss against Carolina, they got beat by a better team, and it just so happened that the officiating did not go their way. I think the calls for Stützle and Shane Pinto shouldn't have been what they were, but there were so many other factors in that game that were going against the Ottawa Senators, and I don't feel they deserve to win that game. And I think if you're just going to pin that type of game just on the refs not being good, I think that's an excuse. If it was a situation where the Ottawa Senators were really playing well and the direct result ended up because the call was wrong, then I have all the time in the world to say, okay, the Ottawa Senators got jobbed. But for me, I saw an Ottawa Senators team that got beat by a faster team, a better defensive team, and got really good goaltending from Spencer Martin, not from any of the top two goalies on their depth chart. Spencer Martin. I think that was like his first ever shutout too, or at least his first of the season. Like, come on, guys. Like, if you're the Ottawa Senators, look, I don't know, man. I can't put that on officiating. They got beat by a better team. I'm willing to say, fine, the calls could have been better, but they got beat by a better team.
Yeah, completely agree with you. I think losers and losing teams make excuses and use those excuses as the reason as to why they lost. You watched
100%.
that first period of play. I watched the first period. It's the only period I was able to watch. I saw highlights, so I know what we're talking about here. Don't worry. But I watched that first period, and that's all I really needed to see to agree with you. The delayed penalty, I mentioned Cousins when you were talking before. That delayed penalty, rewatched the minute of them moving the puck around in that zone. Ottawa was getting beat. They were like Swiss cheese. They couldn't stop a single pass. The lanes were wide open. The boards, they controlled. The Carolina Hurricanes, controlled. Ottawa was just praying to dear God that, they would be able to get that puck out or at least touch up the puck. After a minute and like 20, 30 seconds, they finally did. But that right there was the theme of the night for me, where the Carolina Hurricanes, you already said it, they were faster, they were better, they were much more crisp in their passes, and they were the better team. That being said, I think a lot of the officiating controversy and the anger around it, obviously that goal should have been called a goal. I already said with the McDavid example, literally last night. It's kind of crazy when you look at the two within an hour span, different calls. We need that consistency from the NHL, officials, but we've been calling for that for decades. But I think it really stems from the fact this is like the fourth or fifth game in a row where the refs have been, I'm sorry, at least a storyline as part of the game. And that's not what you want. The NFL has that issue, and it's a big issue. We do not want that in the National Hockey League. I have some written down examples here. Against the Leafs, Oliver Ekman-Larsson cross-checking Shane Pinto on the ground. Somehow he gets an offsetting minor Pinto. Stützle, no goal, of course. Giroux high stick against the Islanders, resulting in a goal against. And the list goes on. Duar against Bray Tkachuk against the Leafs as well. Another interference somehow on Tkachuk. I mean, these are ridiculous calls that are going against Ottawa. What do you think about officiating this year? What has gone on? And I want to throw this question to you as well. As a member of the media, the NBA does something really, really well, where the officials after the games, and I'm hammering this drum, because at this point we have to. The officials in the NBA have to answer to the media about the calls they made during the game. I think this is great for transparency and ensuring, there's no conspiracies going around, and I'll just leave it at that. What do you think about the idea of officials speaking to the media post-game? And also, what do you think about the officials so far this year?
Take a number behind me, because I've been making that point for a long time, that NHL media should be able to, at least in Major League Soccer, you can do this, where you could have a designated reporter ask questions to members of the officiating crew, and someone from the crew is able to respond to them in some way. I personally don't think the NHL tweeting out referee's explanation for why a call was allowed over some PR thing is sufficient for me. So yeah, I'll put that to bed. I'm definitely all for that, and I'm sure I wouldn't be alone in that. To the first part with some of these calls that didn't go Ottawa's way, I'm sure if you went around the league, there are a bunch of other fans who could pull up examples against their other teams too. This kind of speaks to what I mentioned in the first answer. You can't make those things excuses. You can't do that at all, especially for the quality of play this team is trying to play. There are teams in this league who find ways to win in spite of the officiating being bad. And it's not just Ottawa that has to deal with the officiating not being at a high standard. There are a lot of teams around this league. I'm not trying to downplay the calls that have gone against Ottawa here. Like definitely you go back on them, you could easily say like I just said, the Stützle call should have gone the other way. A Pinto call should have gone the other way. They're all I can understand Claude Giroux with the high sticking thing. Like that was a wild instance too. There should have been something there. Yeah, but ultimately there are so many teams that deal with that problem. It's so hard to just make it a thing where it's just Ottawa dealing with it because again, there are so many other people around the league who would be able to easily point at their team getting jobbed in a certain situation and say, well, why doesn't my team get the benefit of the doubt for that call?
Yeah, absolutely. That goes back to my main point where I think we just have to, as the media, we have to call out this uh, crappy officiating. I'm sorry to not be exactly PG 10 plus, but this crappy officiating, it's brutal. And again, it's not the reason we're losing. We're doing it to ourselves with these defensive lapses. It's like 6 or 8 times this year where we've given up goals in bunches within a few minutes. That is on us. That's not on the refs. That's not on anything else. It's up to us.
Yeah,
The
it's
penalties.
not you can't if you
Exactly.
can't use
Completely
that
agree.
as an excuse. That's ultimately my point and all that.
No, and I completely agree. And I'm going to bring you to the next point here because I want to segue because it is
Sure.
absolutely connected, and you're absolutely right. Again, this team has to play better. But the weird thing is, if you look at the advanced analytics, our record right now, we're recording this on Sunday after the Carolina Hurricanes loss on Saturday. We're 8-1, which is, I mean, not great, but we're still at least in the hunt. We're not, and this is what I mean. We were talking about this before the show begun. Everyone needs to calm down. Let's steady the waters. We're still 500. A lot of hockey left. Not even into game 20 of the year. We're not even close to the end of the season. A lot of hockey left. So as long as we're staying in these games, it's great. But I think a lot of the frustration comes from the fact that there's at least 4 games I can name off the top of my head that probably should have resulted in a regulation win and 2 points for the Ottawa Senators. If you look at the advanced analytics, I mean, it's unbelievable. The 5-on-5 Corsi 4 percentage, we are first in November 2024. We are top 5 in the league in the 2024-25 season. Shots for on 5-on-5, we're third in the league, second in November. Expected goals, we are sixth in the league in the season, first in November. Scoring chances for percentage, 51.27, 12th. So we're still roughly just above average there. Fourth in the month of November, but this is what's really interesting to me. This is where it gets really dark and really, really off, where it's goals for 60. In the year, it's okay because we had that great start, 3.22 for 13th in the league. But in the month of November, it's dried up and dried up big time. I think because of that power play, obviously
Mhm.
starting to slow down. It's 29th in the league in November at 2.11, while goals against is 14th at 2.72. And the rest of the stats you just saw on the screen. So I'm not going to go through everything. So basically, in terms of their play, the advanced analytics are screaming Ottawa's playing fantastic, but the results are just not there. Why do you think?
It's a good question. That's a very good question. Because I
Do
do,
that here.
I
We
made,
try our
and I
best.
made, and I made this point on another podcast, the PDO cast with Dmitry Filipovich, where I liked some of the things that Otto was able to do, in particular, where they're getting rush chances and they're getting work in transition and the way that they enter the zone sometimes. I just think maybe it's just a matter of just converting all those opportunities when they get them and finishing off those teams. Like you mentioned, some of the games that you could point back to and say, hey, you know what, the Senators played well. I think of that Vegas game as an example, where for 80% of that game, they were the better team, and then just they allowed goals in quick succession in the third period, and then they lose that game. The Colorado game could have been a little bit better, but it could have been a lot worse too. The
Yeah,
Philadelphia game from a couple nights ago,
that
where
game should have.
they played perfectly. It's just the goaltending was not there. It's just something seems to go wrong when they least need it to go wrong for this team. This should be a team that should be what, maybe 11-6
Yeah,
off of
something
how
like
they've been playing. Sure, I'm open to that possibility, but I don't know. I guess to initially answer your question, I mean, I think I know at one point when I was looking at natural stat trick, particularly on the power play, I thought the team could be a little bit better in terms of generating more high danger chances. And I think even just generally speaking, like just finding ways to work the puck down low so guys like Brady Tkachuk can work their magic in front of the net. A guy like Adam Gaudette was finding success throughout points of the year because he was going to the net and making those opportunities work for him. They have skill and they're able to get goals from around the perimeter and all these different points in the offensive zone. But as long as they continue to work their way towards the middle of the ice and generate chances, then I think they'll see success that way. But yeah, I think for them, it's just finding a way to make it work that way. Because I like what they do on the power play where they're able to move around the puck. And I know they're not trying to just fire shots on net for the sake of firing shots on net. Maybe
Very
sometimes
selective.
that,
Yeah.
yeah, maybe sometimes that extra pass is just one pass too extra. You're getting too fancy with it, and it results in some carelessness and some of those turnovers. But I get what they're trying to do too. They're not trying to just take shots just for the sake of taking shots. You're trying to work your way towards the slot, the bumper position, so you can get yourself a higher probability of getting a chance on net that's actually going to be worthwhile. So, my initial assessment is just the Senators need to find a way to work more pucks in to Brady Tkachuk, and they found success before at different points of the season doing that. They just need to find a way to do that more consistently, especially when they're able to sustain offensive zone time.
Wait, you're saying the Sens need to be more consistent?
Well, that's the theme this whole year for me. Like, I think this team looks like a playoff team when they play at their absolute best.
Yeah.
But you're not going to make the playoffs if you can't string more than 2 wins together, which this team has done this season. They have not won more than 2 games in a row this year. They need to win 3, 4, 5 at some point. It doesn't have to be in November. I mean, maybe it probably could be in November. It could be at any point. Just do it. Just do it. But like, I think that's for me the big storyline around this team. And I remember writing about it after 11 games in. It's like, okay, like this team has shown that they're forming an identity. Can you do that over and over? Can you put those wins together and not just start and stop and start and stop and start and stop? So yeah, that's going to be that's an underlying theme for so many different aspects of the game for the Ottawa Senators.
The big concern for me, and if you just saw it on your screen there, I'm going to put it back up because I'm taking a look at the stats here. The biggest concern for me is how that power play is dried up. I didn't realize how much it dried up. I'm taking a look at my stat sheet here.
Yep.
The month of November, we're 26th in the National Hockey League at 13.3. Now look. Before everyone panics, we're already panicking about too many things. Let's just deep breath.
There's no reason to panic. You're not the 20-game mark yet, but I think it's okay to look at what your team is doing right now and be like, oh, okay, like I hope this thing gets fixed or this needs to be better. Teams go through seasons where if you're not at your absolute best at game 5 or game 15 of the season, that's okay. If you're working towards that, that's still good. And I think the Senators have shown promise and they're working towards that identity. They've shown that they can play at that level. They just need to put it together consistently. At the risk of sounding like a broken record, I had to emphasize that. Not to cut you off here.
It's the word of the day, and no problem at all. My main point that though is, and I'm going to preface by saying we've missed Pinto for portions. Perron unfortunately has been out for some time for more important reasons. So key components of our bottom 6 weren't there. Amadio literally didn't have a goal for like the first 13 games of the year. So, and he's been fine, by the way. I've seen some slack about him, or flack, whatever the word is about him. I think it's not called for. Sure, he needs to produce more offensively, but he's a very good defensive player. And, he's not a net negative out there. And I think that's the least you can ask for from a third or fourth line guy. But again, you do want a little more offense from him. But my point really is, again, that power play was always going to dry up. Okay.
Yep.
You weren't going to shoot at 4 out of 10, for the entire year. It was going to drop down. The big concern for me is, and the big guys are producing. I'll talk about this later. I have a very interesting stat about Batherson, Tkachuk, and Stützle and how impactful they are on the game. Their points, how much they're averaging per game and everything. They've had fantastic starts to the year. The main concerning thing for me is, and you mentioned Adam Gaudette. That is like the one bottom 6 player, in my opinion, this year that has stepped up and produced offensively. The rest of the bottom 6 players really haven't. And that has been the issue for Ottawa for years. Now, again, Perron is back. Pinto's back. I think things are going to get much better, but I also think you can take a look at that and be like, all right, I mean, you had a lot of grinders and physical guys in your bottom 6, not a lot of offense there. Of course, the team is going to struggle. And I think the reason why Ottawa's not getting killed defensively is the bottom 6 is still improved. These are still fine players, but your point getters like Perron and Pinto have been out for a good amount of time, and Amadio has struggled and whatnot. So again, it's really up to that bottom 6. I said it last year. I'm going to say it again. If that bottom 6 with Perron and Pinto coming back with Amadio, them reuniting for that third line, I think that should do great things for Ottawa. But It's up to that bottom
Absolutely.
six.
And
They
also
need to
that
tip in
fourth
those
line too,
nations.
like not to cut you off here, and I
No.
get that Autumn Gaudette's carried a lot offensively, but
Yep.
like the underlying numbers have really been supportive, I find, of
Yeah. I
that fourth
mean, that
line, in
fourth
particular with
line.
Nick Cousins and
Yeah.
Zach McEwen.
Sure.
They're getting a lot of offensive zone
They
time. They're
cycle them in
generating
zone two.
chances. They're
Yeah.
cycling in the
Yep.
zone. Fine, okay, Zach McEwen's not going to score a goal like every game. Fine, Nick Cousins is not going to score a goal every game, and the same deal goes for Adam Gaudette. But they're not there are a lot of fourth lines in the NHL where you put them on and they lose matchups all the time.
They
They're
do well.
hemmed in their own zone, and you're wondering every night, why is this team playing this fourth line? I don't think you've had to say that much about the Ottawa Senators fourth line. I think it's been among the better ones in the National Hockey League this year. And the fact that they're getting the production they've been getting from Adam Gaudette throughout this year, I think is an absolute bonus. He's been playing well under Travis Green. And Travis Green knows what he's had in this player, considering that he had him in Vancouver. I think that for you could point to the underlying metrics and yeah, the statistics and the eye test as well support it. The
Yep.
Senators could do worse with the fourth line that they have. They're doing pretty well with it. And you make a great point. They've played stretches without David Perron. Shane Pinto's now returning to the lineup, and he's slowly getting back to the player that this team expects him to be. Of course, they're not going to be at 100%, I think. Like, it's going to take a bit of time for them to really just get back into it. But once they get back into producing, then the Senators at least should feel a little bit more comfortable with that bottom six. I think they've been getting some good things from them. I don't have that much flack to say about those two lines.
Yeah, I think the fourth line, I'm glad you brought that up. It's just, again, and I mentioned this with Amadio because everyone just looks at point totals and are like, oh, he's good or he's bad. You got to watch the game. You got to look at the advanced analytics too. And I know some people either don't have the time for it or really don't care. That's their
Sure.
prerogative. Don't blame them at all. At the end of the day, you still need offense from the bottom six. But I do agree with you. That fourth line in particular, what a fun surprise it's been. Ottawa, you've watched a lot of Ottawa even before you started covering the team, of course. You've been around the league for a while. And Ottawa's fourth line, let's just say, the faster you can get them off the ice, the better. Not this year. No, you see them. Firstly, sometimes they're starting period. Sometimes they're starting in the offensive zone. Pardon me. You've never really seen that, and they're carrying possession against some really good lines. Sometimes they're facing top six lines. So completely agree with you. And I'm glad you mentioned
There
that.
was a game this year, I think it was against Tampa, where the fourth line held its own against Nikita Kucherov.
Yes,
They held
yes,
their
yes,
own and
yes.
hemmed them in their own zone. That's a good fourth line.
Insane.
Like, you don't expect the fourth line to go up against
Yeah.
one of the best players in the world and do well. Like, the Senators should deserve some credit for how good their fourth line has been
Amen.
throughout this year. Like, I don't have a lot of bad things to say about that line.
Just
I'm
hope,
getting really excited talking about them, but like, I think that bears emphasizing.
and you know what? I really do agree because again, you got to give these role players credit for the role they're playing and how well they're doing in that role. So with Perron and Pinto back, and you said it yourself, they got to get acclimated. It's been a while, especially Perron. He missed 11 games, so he's going to take some time. But once they're back, you have that third line more on the offensive side, and that fourth line is more the defensive side. But again, they're able to generate too. I love the fluidity of this lineup and how flexible it is. Each line can kind of do it all. And you can't say that for many teams. So with a healthy lineup, and this is so cliche, this team is for sure a playoff team, and this team should be playing better than they have been. Again, we had Zub out for a long time as well. So, we haven't been healthy all year. But again, no excuse. Teams deal with injuries. You got to find ways to win. And I know, again, I always get flack for this. Last year, we dealt with a lot of injuries, and I said that. People are like, oh, how do you win without injuries? So what? I mean, the Washington Capitals, for example, they dealt with some major injuries. They already had a thin lineup as is, and they still made the playoffs. I don't want to hear those excuses. You should expect better from your team if you think they're as good as you say they are. And I mentioned Zoop because I want to go into a segue here because I want to bring some positivity. Let's move the rain and the dark clouds. Let's bring the light back into this conversation, all right? As Jensen and Shabbat have been fantastic this year, and I think you could agree with that. They've been
I 100% agree with that. They've been their most stable pairing throughout the year. They're the only pairing that hasn't changed up at different points. Shabbat, with the way he's able to contribute offensively, and how sneaky good Nick Jensen is with his puck moving ability and how sure-handed he is defensively, they've easily been the best pairing throughout this season.
Well, take a look at these stats, right? Take a look at these stats because these stats are incredible. Out of defensemen in the National Hockey League that have played over 150 minutes on 5-on-5, Nick Jensen and Shabbat for Corsi for percentage are sixth in the National Hockey League. They are for shots for percentage fourth best in the league. For expected goals for percentage, they're eighth best in the league. Scoring chances for percentage, seventh best in the league. High danger chances for percentage, 23rd. Goal differential of +4. That is fantastic. That is absolutely fantastic from your second pairing to be top 10 in all the important metrics. And you can say 23rd for high danger scoring chances for. That is fantastic when it's from your second pairing. Julian, how are we feeling? You kind of mentioned it briefly. I'm going to give you the couple minutes here. Just tell us how you're feeling about that pairing, because my goodness, and
I don't know if I need to add that much. Like
love Jensen.
you
Love
laid it out in terms of the advanced statistics. I laid it out in terms of what both guys can do from an eye test perspective. I think the fact that the Senators can rely on that pairing so as much as they have throughout the year, that's a positive
Yeah.
for this team. And I think the fact that Jensen has fit in as well as he has alongside Shabbat, and it's not as if they've done anything special to just get acclimated to each other. Just in trying to talk to both guys, like it just seems as if they've just do what normal players do, which is just, you're on the road, you get along with all of your guys. It's just a team thing. And it just so happens they play with each other and they find a way to make it work. It's just a pairing that just works out and is able to work at both ends. And maybe more so Thomas on the offensive side, maybe more Nick with defense. But I think both guys at different points have shown that they can play that other side of their game too and be effective. They're not going to be perfect every single moment, but I think in a season like this for the Sens, where they need, any team could benefit from any stability you can have. The fact that they haven't had to break up those two, as opposed to what's had to happen with Jake Sanderson and his defensive partner, or Tyler Clevin having to play with both Travis Hamonic and Jacob Bernard Docker. And you need those moments to kind of get used to your guys. The fact that they've been able to rely on that pairing throughout this first juncture of the season, that's really good for the Ottawa Senators.
Yeah, completely agree with that. And on the point of Jensen, when we traded him for Chikrin, and this goes back to the point about everyone just takes a look at the goal totals and point totals and evaluates players based off that. That is certainly, an important criteria. You can't win games without scoring goals. So I hear that. But also there's more to it. I mean, Jensen's a fantastic skater. And most of all, he's a defensive guy, but he can play as a two-way guy. He has offense to bring. But most importantly, he allows Shabbat to play his game. As you know, Tom Shabbat has played far too many minutes over the last few years here in Ottawa. He's been like a donkey. He's been like a mule. He's been overworked and has been the guy. He's been playing 30-plus minutes for like 4 or 5 years. Under DJ Smith, I mean, he used him so often. It was incredible for the worst reasons. So having a guy like Jensen with the minutes also cut back, it's not shocking Shabbat's flourishing. It's not shocking that Jensen is, playing well with a guy like Shabbat, and they're, have good chemistry with one another. And that's why when, a lot of people call me biased and other things, when I set this for the trade, Chikrin and Jensen, on an empirical value, yeah, probably the Capitals won because Chikrin is like a 40, 50-point defenseman. He is left-handed, and that's less valuable, but still 40, 50-point defenseman is very valuable. I get it. But for this team and their needs right now, Jensen is the better defenseman. No doubt about it, and we're seeing it now. By the way, I don't know if you saw me. I was struggling with my hair back here. I took a shower before this, of course. I want to look clean and stuff. I got curly hair. I'm sorry, guys. I've been playing with it all interview. It's so annoying. I hate having curly hair sometimes for reasons like this. I don't know what to do, man. I have to think something. I can already hear the comments.
I didn't even notice.
I can already hear the comments.
I didn't even notice. I didn't even think about it. Why did you do this?
Why is the guy touching his hair so much? I just had to explain.
I didn't even notice, dog. Like, it's okay, bro. Like, sometimes I adjust my headphones. I used to have earphones. I would like adjust them all the time when I was on camera, man.
Watch
like,
your back.
Okay.
You're gonna die. Laughing.
It's okay. It's okay, man. Like, hey, do what you gotta do with your hair, bro.
But
yes, Nick Jensen and Tom Shabbat, great pairing. Very great pairing.
Let's just move on from that. Great pairing. You kind of mentioned it, by the way, with Sanderson, with Hamonic at times, and Hamonic and Clevin and JBD, and you know where I'm going with this. We all know about the controversy on that third pairing, where some people are not happy with the fact that Hamonic is starting. Sorry, I'm still laughing over that. Hamonic starting over Jacob Bernard Docker with Tyler Clevin. What are your thoughts on that third pairing and the controversy between JBD? Well, not between the two, but about the two between, of course, JBD and Hamonic about one of them being now JBD, being in the rafters, or what do you call it, the press box, while, of course, Hamonic starts.
Analytically, JBD and Clevin look good together. I think there have been different moments throughout their time together where they've even surprised me. At first, I thought, okay, that's a pretty inexperienced pair, but they've been able to limit the mistakes they've had between both of them. Travis Hamonic, I can understand the frustration from fans with the way that he plays and maybe some of the mistakes that he makes and the fact that he has this just he's always going to find a way to shoot it if the puck
Loves
comes
his
to him in the offensive zone. Like he's keeping the slap shot alive in the National Hockey League, man. I could also understand from the perspective of the Ottawa Senators where they look at their defense and they're like, we need to ensure that we have experience in our lineup and we need a guy who can has had that number of games. And I get it. You can't just win games off of just veteran experience and just being a guy who's been in the league and knows a thing or two. Sometimes it does work, but it's not everything. But I am willing to understand that that is part of it for why teams put lineups the way that they do. I still think it's splitting hairs at the end of the day. I still think the team could use an upgrade on the defensive position. Shabbat Jensen's a fine pairing. Zub and Sanderson's fine. But if you add another defenseman to that mix who could play on the right hand side, you make your defense better. Someone who can kill penalties, someone who can eat up a bunch of minutes. Maybe you move Zoop somewhere else in that as a result of adding that extra pairing guy. I just think the fact that a lot of people who focused on that, like I understand why that's there, but at the end of the day, we all know this team could still use an upgrade, particularly on the right side. You're gonna have to get a little bit creative in terms of what you add there, but I think they've at least made the most of it with what they've had. I think over these last few games, can you say Travis Hamonic has lost them games? I don't think you could say that. I don't think he's necessarily played that badly. I think he's been fine. I mean, I'm not looking at the analytics too closely at this point, but like, I don't think he's been the reason why this team has lost games over the last little while.
Yeah, I don't find that criticism a fair one for Hamnick. And, again, I always say this, people are complaining. These are players that are in the best league in the National Hockey League. They're all
Yeah.
good. So we got to keep that in mind. But I think the fair criticism around this is the fact that Jacob Bernard-Docker is the younger defenseman, the defenseman you drafted, the defenseman you've developed for years, and is a guy, if you look at the advanced analytics as well, has earned the shot to play. Well, Hamonic, he's a veteran, so he's earned the respect and earned that trust from the coach, Travis Green. I think, in my opinion, anyways, and I think a lot of people would agree with this, the frustration comes from the fact that JBD and that minor stint when Zub was out was fantastic. Him and Clem really, really good.
They were good.
I get it. He doesn't have the trust from Coach Green. He needs that opportunity to get that trust, though. And especially now, when we've lost games and we're just keeping the same lineup, it doesn't make much sense to not give him a shot, especially since, again, firstly, Clevin and JBD have some chemistry together, obviously. And two, he's the younger guy that you've been developing for years. So I think it really stems from that, at least for me anyways, where I agree with you. There are losses. There are some losses where it's like, all right, Hamonic, I'm not saying this year, but in the past, and there's been one or two this year where he hasn't been great. But yeah, he's not the reason they're losing these games.
Yeah.
It's true. But again, I think it really stems from the fact that you got a young guy. He's just sitting, in the press box, and it makes no sense when he's shown decent numbers, and has shown. Look, I always say this. I had him on the show. I talked to him about this. From the right side on the blue line, he's a leading goal scorer in the National Hockey League last year. This is a guy. If you want a guy shooting pucks nonstop from the right side, you don't want it to be Travis Hamonic. I don't think. I think you want it to be Jacob Bernard-Docker because he had the most goals from the right side along the blue line last year in the National Hockey League. But all jokes aside, again. I do think it's such a look. It's not the winner. It's not a make or break for the Sens. I just think
it isn't. It is not. I just think that like for people to focus on that. Oh, you go ahead.
It's no. It's okay. I just want to finish so you can make your point.
Yeah. Sorry about that.
No. Don't apologize. It's okay. This is a podcast. We're having a conversation. We're having.
Yeah.
I think it just stems from the culture in the coaching staff where they believe more in the veterans and whatnot. And I think that is a concern for not for players, sorry, but for fans and media maybe, where it's like, all right, even if you're young, just because you're younger, even if you've shown you've been playing better, you're not gonna get the shot. And I think Mark Mathot spoke about that, for example, on TSN and on Twitter or X, whatever the hell you want to call it. And that takes a lot. That resonates a lot with me because he's a former player. He's been in that spot before. So that's why I cut you off because I kind of want to see what you think about that That's kind of why I'm upset. Where it's like, I get it. Every other coach in the National Hockey League would do literally the same thing. This is how it is with coaches. I always say that, but nonetheless, it's still frustrating, no?
For sure. That my first thinking with that is exactly that last point you made. So many other coaches do this across the National Hockey League where if they have to choose between the older guy or the younger player, they will choose the veteran 9 times out of 10 just off of just the use of having a veteran and having that experience in a lot of different situations versus just playing what they deem who they deem to be an inexperienced player. But I also thought that when Clevin and JBD were playing together, I've said this on record too, that if I were Travis Green and I have Artem Zub back ready, I'm not disrupting that third pairing. If they're not bad enough to be disrupted, leave them alone and let them be set. And if it gets to a point where they have a game where they're bad, then you can make the switch and you could plug in a guy like Travis Hamonic. Just trying, I'm just in my head, I was thinking you want to disrupt a lot less with your pairings, but ultimately they did the other thing where they put Zub back with Sanderson and they put Hamonic back on the third pairing, which fine. I mean, it's not as if Clevin's never played with Hamonic before. I can understand that, but I, I was kind of thinking more if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But
Amen. Yep.
also, I mean, like I said, I don't think Hamonic's been that bad the last few games. Um, I think if JBD, it seems like he's an energetic and young enough player where when it comes time for him to return back into the lineup, at the very least, he should still be a serviceable player to play alongside Tyler Clevin and to just kind of keep himself going on that third pairing. And look, I mean, while I still think they could use a little bit more depth on defense, better to have an issue where you're looking at it where, man, like you have all these you have this extra defenseman, and you got to find a way to get him in the lineup versus this team being too thin on defense, and you're stuck up a creek without a paddle, and you have no real way to address your defensive issues, and you're up against the cap like how they are now.
And that last point is a very good one in terms of the cap and his cap hit and his no movement clause. I think those are good points that are a little crazy. But
That is a very good point with Travis Hamonic and his NMC as well.
that's
I
why
wasn't really
that's the only reason he's still here.
for
No,
sure, but
him.
like
It's just that's why.
sure, yeah, but I don't know. I still just think that, especially against Carolina, I didn't necessarily think that. I mean, I don't. I mean, look, the team just
Game-winning
wasn't
goal
good
should not
enough.
have went in. So I agree with you on that. Like that.
Sure, but for it should not have gone in. The goaltending should have been better, and also just this team need to get their chances up too. Philadelphia, I mean, the goaltending was not good, and Linus Ullmark will be the first person to tell you goaltending was not good in that game. I don't know if that defense has been the problem, at least for these last few games.
I think the Sens struggle a lot with puck possession and keeping that cycle going. And that's, when you talk to people about Hamnick, they're just screw this guy, I hate this guy. They don't have a real criticism. My criticism is the fact that he doesn't know how to keep the possession going. We joke about, at the beginning about the slap shots and how he's always going to shoot that puck. And I get that. That's fine sometimes. If you have an open lane, take a shot. I'm not against a slap shot. I love a slap shot. Trust me. But with Jacob Bernard Docker, he's much smarter with the puck in terms of, keeping the possession going, holding that puck along the blue line, letting guys open up and set up so they can start passing it around and create an offensive chance. With Hamonic, it's kind of rushed. Even in the defensive zone, same thing. Just throw it, get it out there like it's hot potato. And, again, in all situations, it's unfair to be like, you got to take your time. Sometimes you got to rush. Sometimes you just got to get that puck out. That I understand. But it's far too often for Hamnick. And for a veteran player, I expect more. I do. So that is my main concern with him. It's just there's no puck possession with him. And you got a young defenseman next to him. And that's how kind of those defensive disasters kind of come to be. Now, you mentioned the goaltending, especially in that Flyers game, where Linus Ullmark on 4 of those 5 goals, in my opinion, probably should have not went in. Maybe one of them you can make the argument, like the 2 and 1 in the third. But, Ullmark, I am still very confident in him. Goalies are going to have good and bad games. He, no doubt, though, has had an up and down season, dealt with an injury in preseason, literally missed the entire preseason, basically. He's sometimes been elite, got a shutout, of course, against the Toronto Maple Leafs just the other day, and then sometimes not so much, literally lost that game for Ottawa against the Flyers. Do we need to let him get into more of a groove, or what do you think's going on there with Linus Ullmark?
It's always difficult to try to study how a goalie's feeling because
Yeah,
they're goalies. They're
weird.
just
They're
weird by nature. Um, Not to sound like repetitive again, but consistency is obviously needed with Linus Ullmark. But what a fascinating week for him. He looks solid against the Toronto Maple Leafs. He gets himself a shutout, and then he has the Philadelphia game that doesn't go his way.
Yeah.
And this all stems how many days after he got asked where his game was at, and he was like, I don't know where it is.
Yeah.
And like, I get he was trying to be a little cheeky after the fact. I know I asked him that in Toronto, where I was like, where do you think your game's at now? He's like, still doesn't know, and he was smiling. I'm of the school where there's a little bit of truth in every joke. Like I think if you're Linus Ullmark, you're looking at how you started so far. You obviously want to be a little bit better, but you're obviously thinking of the team as a whole and the fact that they're at 500 and the season's not lost. And there's so many different things that this team needs to go through before they get to the playoffs. That's kind of what he was alluding to when he was talking about this topic on Tuesday after the Leafs game. But I think the best is still to come for this goaltender. I think he's shown in different moments that he can be the guy who is worth relying upon, and why they're about to pay him a whole bunch of money over the next 4 seasons after this one. I still think he's their guy, but yeah, I
They don't
think
play him like
obviously.
this. They don't play him like he's the guy. That's why I'm asking.
Well, I mean, the fact
Him
that he
started
was
more than two
off for
games in
how
a row
many
was great.
games with the strain
That's
didn't
true.
help.
That's a fair point.
I also
I think that's
think the
still an
fact that
accurate.
some, sure, it might be, I don't know, but like I think also some of the results that he's had also don't play into it. But also, I'll bring up this too. I was thinking about this ahead of the Carolina game, and I wasn't surprised that I don't know how, I didn't really see the reaction to Anton Forsberg starting the Saturday game, but
It
I'll
was
put it to you
mixed.
this way.
It was mixed.
Sure, but like, when was the last time Anton Forsberg played a game before Carolina?
Been a few games, yeah.
Been a few games. And if you're trying to get your goaltenders going here, I don't know if you necessarily want your backup to go longer than a week without playing, because that doesn't help
It was
them
9 days
either.
to be exact, yeah.
You don't want Anton Forsberg going a whole bunch of games without playing. And you put him in that game, and then you have Edmonton, Vegas, Vancouver, all those teams coming up. That's pretty much the time you want Linus Ullmark to get those games in and get in some kind of rhythm. That's not to say you can't play Anton Forsberg in any of those games, but if you're trying to get him on some kind of stretch run, that's typically the type of time to do it. Because if you had played him the Saturday, then you're playing him again, then you're playing Ullmark Edmonton, you're playing him Vegas, you're getting him on all those games. You might have to throw in Forsberg in one of those
Yeah.
games, and I think they'd have much rather do what they have done, where they get Forsberg to play on the Saturday, and then you can run through Linus Ullmark over the next 3 games. But also, look, if he's still getting the majority of these starts, and you're only seeing like Anton Forsberg like a third of a week's performances of games, like that's not bad either. Like I like the idea of a backup goaltender still getting some kind of repetition, where if you can get them in a game a week, that should be fine, I think. And despite the one goal allowed where it did not look good coming along the goal line, I don't think Anton Forsberg was the reason why the Ottawa Senators lost that game on Saturday. I think he was serviceable beyond that goal.
Well, I again, I didn't watch the full game, so I don't want to comment too much on Forsberg's performance in that game. Highlights don't tell the whole story, so
When
I'll take your
that's
word.
fair, but I think if you look through the highlights and some of the saves that he makes, and you look at how some of the plays have gone, and those goals allowed, I'm not throwing a lot of blame on uh goals 2, 3, and well,
It's
fourth was
certainly
an
not a
empty net.
yeah,
So
it's certainly not a repeat of Thursday against the Flyers. That's for sure.
no.
You're not pinning that loss on Forsberg, unlike the game against the Flyers with Allmark. But the last goal against the Flyers and the first goal against Carolina were literally the same.
Very much similar.
So
Absolutely, yes.
that's also a concern for me. Where is this like? And I'm not going to blame the coaching. These are players. They're veterans. They've been in the league for a while. They know what they need to do. But do you think at a certain point you got to take a look at the coaching staff in terms of the goaltending and wonder to yourself, is there an issue here that it's kind of hurting the Sens and their goaltending and their positioning? Because again, it's a little weird that these squeaker goals happen on both goalies within a 2-game span.
Um, it's on the players to figure out if they have to go back to coaching, and coaching has to ensure that they get some things right to ensure that those plays don't happen again. Absolutely. I don't know if it's I don't. It might be premature to really look at it from a coaching standpoint. Where you look at the goaltending coach and saying he's not doing what he needs to do with the guys. Like, I'm not really sure. I'm not really sure how to pinpoint on that point. I think with Allmark and Forsberg, they know what needs to be done. They
Mhm.
just need to go out there and essentially do it.
I always think about Carey Price. After that major knee injury, he
Yep.
brought in what's his name? Oh, I forgot the name. I apologize. From Tampa Bay or was it Chicago? One of the top goalie coaches. He brought it in. He brought him himself. The team wasn't really involved. He said, "I want this guy." They brought him in. I wonder if Ottawa gets to a point there with Linus Ullmark where he makes the money where he's like, I want this guy. I think they would just listen to be like, let's bring him in. So that is something, in my opinion, to just keep an eye on because sometimes, this is a new goalie in a new organization with a coach he's never really worked with before. This is not exactly, he didn't choose. I'm not saying Allmark doesn't dislike or doesn't like the coach, Justin Peters. I'm just saying, when you're paying a guy $8.25 million after this year, and he's making quite a bit of money this year as well. I do wonder if down the road, maybe just maybe Linus Allmark wants to change things up in that regard. That's why I kind of threw it out there because again, I always think to that Carey Price example where he brought in his guy and his season turned around like that. So that's kind of what I'm thinking, but we'll see what happens with that. Again, I agree with you in terms of you can't start Allmark for 70 games. This isn't the 2003 New Jersey Devils. He's not Martin Brodeur.
Teams don't do that anymore.
Exactly.
Like I think back
He's
to
coming off an injury.
when I was covering the Calgary Flames and having conversations with the director of goaltending, Jordan Sigalet, and that's Jacob Markstrom, who had his own issues to deal with. But with him, like they didn't want him to play 60, 65 games in the NHL season. You're trying to get him to get to 50, 55 and trying to get Dan Vladar's opportunities. And right now in Calgary, where they have Vladar and Dustin Wolf, I mean, they might end up splitting the net, where it could really be like a 50-50 swap either way. In this case, I think Linus Ullmark's the guy, but if he plays 55, 58 games in a season, that seems like it could be par for the course. If he gets to 60, then you're like, okay, well, yeah, like I think that might be the absolute limit, but like, yeah,
50 games.
55, 58 games, like that's what I expect from Linus Ullmark. But I also think like it's okay if he's playing well enough and he gets a 3-4 game stretch, but then at some point you have to put Anton Forsberg in.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people have been very harsh on, Anton Forsberg. I think ever since that,
Myself included. I was harsh on the beginning of the year, but he stepped up since.
yeah, I mean, exactly. Ever since that crazy game against the Kings, I mean, that was just one in a million. He's really stepped back in a big way, bounced back, pardon me, in a big way in those 4 starts since 2 shutouts. I mean, he's been very, very good. So
I think
again,
so.
I think it really comes down to uh, these weak, weird goals. It just
Yep.
kills the flow. And I think that's why there's such a spotlight on the goalies. Because otherwise, if you really look at it, they've been pretty solid. And their save percentage has been top 15 in the National Hockey League. Both have an above 900 save percentage. So again, you definitely can ask and expect for more, especially from Allmark in these losses. But also, I like to take a look at the positives. We're still very early in the year. And the goalies have shown me enough to be like, all right, we're going to be okay. Bad games happen. As long as the bad games don't continue to happen so often.
Yeah.
Again, Allmark missed the entire preseason, and he's shown glimpses of being brilliant.
He
So
still got at least one game in the preseason, though, and he looked good in that preseason game. He didn't
again,
miss
like
every single game.
it's a small sample. It's a small sample size, and I think if we're in December and January and we're still talking about the goaltending was good here and it was bad, okay. But
Yeah.
again, let's just let them get into a flow. Let's get into like what you said, where Forsberg starts that one out of like 3 or 4 games. Let's get into
Yep.
that flow. Let's get everyone getting back and healthy, and then let's take a step back and take a look. Again, I spoke about those advanced analytics in the month of November. Ottawa and their underlying statistics shows this team should be playing much better than they are and should have a much better record than they already do. So let's take a deep breath. Let's see how they continue to do in a tough stretch, as you already mentioned here in November. And maybe in a month from now, I'll be singing a different tune. But as of right now, look, not great. I really wish we won some of those games. But I'm, as I said in our first segment about, this career and staying positive, I'm going to stay positive just for my sanity so I can keep on making this content with a smile on my face.
The sun rises every day. Linus Ullmark will tell you that. And also having a mind of a goldfish, which Ted Lasso has said, and also Linus Ullmark has said. Look, man, I think as long as this team keeps itself afloat, keeps themselves hovering around 500, they're in a position where something could come together and they can go on a run. They still have to, win a couple games in a row, and that'll really ease some tension around the fan base, ease some nerves. But I think considering the circumstances, you take that step back, you give yourself that 1,000-foot view. I don't mind what the Senators are at in terms of their record. I think it's been okay.
Exactly. And that's why I want to finish this off with, again, kind of what I said before. Let's depart the thunder clouds and let's get back to the light. As you said, every single morning the sun comes up, it rises, and it's a great day to be a Sens fan, whether we're winning or losing. We got a team in Ottawa, ladies and gentlemen. That is something to celebrate in its own. But
100%.
Kachuk, again, I just want to say this. There's a lot of cities in the North America that lost their teams. I always like to look at it in that viewpoint as well. We lost our team, we got it back, and we should be thrilled every single day to have a team that we can shout about and celebrate about. Now, I mentioned before in this interview, the big three, as I like to call it right now, being Kachuk, Stützle, and Batherson. They've been fantastic. They've combined for 56 points so far in the first 17 games of the year, averaging 3.29 points per game. Who out of those three has impressed you the most so far this year?
It's Tim Stützle. Tim Stützle is the most skilled player on this team, the most talented player on this team. Uh,
I think you
One
agree
thing
too.
that I love the bobblehead. I think in terms of the offensive ability that he's able to show game in and game out, it's really stunning to watch. And maybe I need a little larger of a sample size for this one, but I'm seeing some commitment to the defensive side. I don't know how big of a deal it's been for him up until this season, but I just see a little bit more, and it's really cool to see from this type of player. When you get a chance to watch the game back, if you can, watch Tim Stützle in the third period against the Carolina Hurricanes. I get the Sens are down and out, but dude is like skating around,
Tough
trying to
ones, yeah.
make plays happen, making passes, making plays. He makes a brilliant spin move leading to a pass to Brady Tkachuk where has to take that extra second and he gets stopped. But that all starts because of a brilliant spin move around a player. Like Tim Stützle, in terms of the skill, in terms of what he's able to bring to his team day in, day out, like there have been moments he's willing to put the team on his back. And I think we're starting to see a player who needs maybe another season or two of this where before we can really truly call him a NHL superstar around the league, but like he's right there. I think he's on the verge of being that if he isn't already. And the fact that he's been able to show off what he's done over these like less than 20 games played, but I've really been impressed with how he's been playing. I think Brady Tkachuk deserves a lot of props with how he's found success offensively and where he's being spotted on the power play. And Drake Batherson, too, I think just not to say we forget about him sometimes, but he's able to produce offensively as well. That one timer,
Yeah.
he plays that scoring winger role well. But in terms of an all around player of all three of those guys, I think Tim Stützle fits the bill best for me.
I think what's very notable, Tim Stützle, is firstly, he's averaging just under 20 minutes of ice time a night. He is undisputably the number one center on this team and the number one forward on this team. I'm sorry, Brady Tkachuk, but in terms of offense, he's your guy. Now, in terms of overall game, Tkachuk's always going to be your guy. He's your captain. He's a unicorn type player. I know TSN was debating monster or unicorn. Unicorn's the right title for Tkachuk because he's such a unique player. And don't let the soft title of unicorn undersell how aggressive and strong he is. This year already has 75 hits. It's actually insane when you
Yep.
think about it, right? But on the story of hits, you mentioned Stützle and his improved defensive game. 28 hits this year already. He has 11 block shots. He's been pretty solid defensively as well. And again, you see that with the coaching staff giving him a lot of those minutes. You've seen him on the penalty kill as well in short stints at times. So this is a guy that, in my opinion, can exceed 80 plus points this year. He can
I
maybe
agree.
reach 90 to 100. This is going to be the breakout season for Tim Stützle, in my opinion. He just needs a healthy lineup around him because you're going to need to have goal scorers around you to get to that point, of course. And of course, Drake Batherson, as you said, deserves some love. This guy has been sneaky good. And when he gets that contract in a year, my goodness, is he ever going to get paid? Let's not talk about that right now. Let's just good vibes. Let's stay away from that right now because he's going to get paid. I don't know how we're going to do that, but I think his defensive game as well, Drake Batherson. Look, his defensive game has left a lot to be desired until this year. That's been one of the biggest issues of Batherson so far in his young career. That's why you saw him get dropped down the lineup at times, especially under DJ Smith. I was looking at an old lineup and Pinto and Batherson with one another on the third line. So Batherson this year has really improved defensively. The offense, never shocking to me. I always saw that coming. But the improved defensive game from Batherson really shows how this overall core is really starting to mature. So those three are really encouraging to me. Then you got guys like Norris, who scored in 3 games in a row until last night.
Yeah. He's
Giroux
been
is
really
still
good.
like aging like whiskey. He's fantastic. So
He's
we're
been
gonna be
such a
okay.
great veteran for that team. He's just what he's been able to provide on a nightly basis for that team. I'm impressed a lot with how Claude Giroux plays offensively for this team and just that leadership he provides as well. Like I just it's wild. Like this guy's gonna be like 37 in January, in the new year. Like it's really cool to see a player at his age still play at a very high level. And he doesn't show any signs of him slowing down, and I don't think he wants to either.
No, and I think it's not shocking with Claude Giroux. I mean, the point totals is shocking, but the fact that he's producing isn't, because you know this as well as I do. He's been in the league for so long, just like
Hmm.
you. So you know this. Claude Giroux, he's not the flashy guy. He's not the fast guy. He's the smart player. His puck possession skills are some of the best in the National Hockey League. The way you can't take that puck off him and the way you can see the play develop before it develops is why he's so elite and producing at such a high rate at such an old age. Again, I always love calling him Mr. Whiskey because this guy ages like whiskey, and the older he gets, the better he gets, you know.
I like that.
Now, and feel free to use it, by the way.
All
On
right.
we've been yapping here for over an hour, so I'll cut it here. I think we covered a lot of points, but Julian, always a pleasure. We're definitely gonna have to get you on the show again soon if you're
Let me
willing.
know.
But let us know where we can read your stuff, follow you, and everything in between.
The Athletic, please subscribe to The Athletic if you haven't done so already, not just for my work, but we have the best editorial team in the game when it comes to cover the National Hockey League. Our national coverage is great. Our regional coverage for all the teams that we cover is really great. And I'm also always just thankful for people who want to read my stuff. And also, if you want to know what's going on around the NHL, the Chris Johnston Show is the place to be. So whether you listen to us or you watch us, subscribe to the podcast. We're 10 episodes away from 300. I don't know what we're going to do for episode 300, but it's a really exciting time for us. So please subscribe to the CJ Show.
Hashtag ask CJ about my whiskey name for
Yes,
Drew.
Sirski.
Well, hey, Julian, absolute pleasure. Well, I definitely have to have you on again very, very soon. And hopefully next time it'll be only positives, no negatives to talk about. But Julian, until then, we'll talk soon. Thanks again and take care.
Thanks again for having me, my man. This was awesome.
Absolutely my pleasure. And thanks for bearing with my hair. It's been nuts.
Play with it
Oh
there.
man. You're gonna watch back the interview, you're gonna be like, what the hell is this guy doing?
Play with it. I still don't think it's a big deal. It's
It's
okay.
no big deal. I just felt I had to say something because I was doing like every 2 minutes. I'm like, I can already
It's
hear the
okay. That's
comment.
okay. That's all right. It's all good. Don't worry about it, man.
All right, guys. Well, we'll see you all soon. Take care.